I'm going to come over here. I'm going to do my presentation a little bit differently. I am trusting that you all know something about net neutrality. That's why you're here, right? It's been in the news a little bit, right? Everybody's heard something. I only have 20 minutes, and as a lawyer, I will tell you 20 minutes is an extremely short time period. Our concepts are very complicated. It sometimes takes a long time to do it. So what I have done here is I have completely flipped the script here. I'm trying to build as much time for your questions as possible. And I have put together a presentation using the Japanese Pechakucha style, which is 20 slides for 20 seconds apiece. They will run automatically as soon as I start this on here. So it's going to run through, and I hope I can keep up with it. I hope I can make this both informative for you, explain some complex questions and issues in 20 seconds at a time, and then we will dig back into those with whatever questions that you have for us. Okay, so please start thinking about that. Be ready to do this. If all goes well, I will be finishing us up here on time and on for the next one, and we'll have plenty of time for questions. So with that introduction, I'm going to go ahead and start. Now, I don't believe in hiding the ball, so I'll tell you that first of all. So here's my position on net neutrality. Relax. Relax. We're not going to see significant changes right now. What we are going to see is a lot more pushback, a lot back and forth here. There's been agreement on the general goal, but not how to get there and not how to make it effective or make it enforceable. So, what just happened? This is the rules that got repealed on December 20th. They were bright line rules, no blocking of lawful contact, no throttling, no paid prioritization. And then there's a general conduct standard and there's a disclosure standard. We love disclosure standards as attorneys. That's all the weapons you could possibly need to affect this. That didn't come from nowhere, though, however. That came back from 10 years before that, when in another Republican-led commission, the commissioners all got together and said, we believe in these consumer principles. But it was a policy statement. Consumers can access lawful content. They can use lawful devices. They can use whatever applications they want to use. We put that in place, and then bad things happened. A voice over IP provider got blocked. Comcast slowed peer-to-peer BitTorrent. One of those settled, but the Comcast case did not settle, and the FCC tried to enforce against them. They declared what Comcast had done as unlawful and unreasonable, and they ordered them to cease. Now, Comcast appealed it. Comcast won. That's why you get the Mario Kart, the red shells here, okay? What the court said at the time was, no, a policy statement is not enough. It's not a rule. It has to be related to the statute somehow, and they sent it back because the FCC did not have a valid basis for enforcing the policy. That brought the FCC back, and they said, okay, we're going to put these rules in place. Transparency, does disclose what you're going to do, prohibit blocking, and then they prohibited unreasonable discrimination, but in fixed networks only, not in the mobile, because they recognize problems there. They pinned it on a Section 706, which is way deep in the weeds in telecom. That got appealed as well. And the court here said, hooray, you got the basis right, your authority is correct, you can use 706 if you want. However, with the approach that you took to broadband, you can't use common carrier style regulations. So the discrimination standard didn't pass muster. That gets a banana peel, not the red shells if you're playing Mario Kart. The FCC was responding to that when it adopted the 2015 order. So the real question at the time was, how do we base this? What do we base this on? Do we base it on what's called Title II, which is the traditional telephone regulations, or do we base it on something else? And if it's something else, can we make it work the way that we want it to work? They adopted that order, and here's the irony. The FCC won the third time around. In 2016, just a mere months before Chairman Pai did this, the FCC, the court said, you have authority. We're going to defer to how you classify this service, whether it's telephone-like or non-telephone-like, and you can do all the other things that you did in the order. So it got a big thumbs up there. Now, administration change, a lot of things changed in Washington, you know that. Chairman Pai brought this order up on December 20th. It wipes away the classification. It says, no, broadband is not a telephone service. Broadband is an information service, and I'll dig into that later when we have time to talk about it. Eliminates the bright line rules, puts this in place for the FCC and primarily for the FTC to catch up. Now, this is not going to go into effect right away. This will take months for the FCC to do the steps that are necessary here, putting it in the Federal Register and then getting approval from the other part of the government. Months to do that. The only thing that remains is a transparency rule, which is the disclosure rule. And I'm not a big fan of that because it basically says, if I say I'm going to do bad things to you, if I tell you I'm going to punch you in the face, I'm allowed to punch you in the face. Ironically, it won't be the FCC that enforces that. It'll be the Federal Trade Commission that will check the sufficiency of the disclosures. They're the new cop. And I put here back on the beat because they sort of were when we were debating before the classification of broadband, deciding whether it was Title II. They have some own questions about whether or not they can really reach the AT&Ts and the Verizons of the world. That's being played out here in California, and we'll find out whether or not they're able to do that. But the PI order that just got adopted will be appealed. Every FCC order gets appealed. It's probably going to go back to the same court that addressed this 3 times in 7 years, and it probably will have a whole host of issues on it, but the key is this. Will they defer to the agency? Agencies get a lot of discretion, and it's possible that both the classification as carrier and as non-carrier are both within the zone of reasonableness. There's a rescission effort. You might have heard about that. I wouldn't think about that. I wouldn't worry about that. There's no way they get President Trump to sign that or they get the votes in the House. They might have it in the Senate right now. This is a weird provision that allows them to just repeal something that an agency has done. States are pushing back. I would pay attention to this. 6 states so far have said they're going to adopt their own net neutrality regulation, either through procurement or access to rights of way, public streets, et cetera. Most of those are Democratic states. Nebraska is the one Republican state so far that has done that. The FCC has purported to preempt those, so if they do it, they will be challenged in a different set of appeals. We will see what happens there, but I would watch that one carefully. The Republicans are making noise about doing something on Capitol Hill, but it's just noise right now. The bill that's been introduced is really pretty weak. On the Senate side, there is no companion bill. So what's going to happen? ISPs have a lot of discretion. Favorable FCC climate, very flexible discretion. But there's long-term risk there, so I don't expect them to be wild here. I expect more packaging and free services. Free Hulu, free Netflix, DirecTV if you're an AT&T subscriber. Those types of things, which are essentially paid prioritization, I think will continue and will happen over the next few months. For the content producers, what's that mean? It means money. It means money. It's going to increase your cost to get access to that, to be the one that's Netflix that gets to be included in the package. Your interconnection with the network, you're going to have to pay some of those transport costs where right now you don't, but we don't know how much. Okay? Ultimately, we've seen this. This road continues around and around, and it would continue indefinitely unless and until Congress acts. Congress needs to adopt a set of regulations for internet services. That does not exist in the communications laws right now. There are rules for telephone services, that's our Title II. There's rules for cable services, that's our Title VI. There's rules for wireless services, that's our Title III. And there's rules for broadcast services. There are no rules for internet services. And unless and until Congress acts, we're going to continue to see this kind of ping-ponging back and forth with respect to the methods by which we will be enforcing our rules. As we've seen, there's agreement on the core piece. We want our internet to be open, and we want our internet to be neutral in some manner. There's not agreement on how to get there and what's necessary to get there, and the courts have been a real big impediment to proceeding forward on this. They've really been putting the FCC to the task to say, come up with a valid basis for the way in which you're going to regulate. Now, that's not happened yet. I've gone over my 20 seconds here. That's okay. I expect it will happen. It will have to happen sometime soon. And maybe all this backlash over this will kind of push enough people to say, we need to have a regulation. We cannot allow the agency to go it alone to figure out how they're supposed to do this and to find a valid basis for doing so. So that is my presentation. I know that that was fast, but I want to give you guys a chance for some questions as well.
So you characterize the existing congressional legislation as being a little weak. Where do you think that needs to go to reach the that marker of, you know, actually having a, you know, title whatever, Title X for right. Internet service provisions? Like what do you see as the essential elements that would need to be incorporated into that bill to avoid, as you said, the ping-ponging and actually get some something in the code right. that brings longer-term certainty around this? Yeah,
certainly. Well, I think there's a couple things that there's agreement on right now, which is that you shouldn't block traffic, right? And there's an agreement on that you shouldn't throttle traffic based upon the type of traffic. There is an understanding that network management is a problem, and it's okay to throttle or to slow down traffic in order to manage your network, to manage congestion. And I think there's growing consensus that if you have metered data services like is prevalent in wireless at the moment, when you give unlimited access in that situation, that the really substantial parties who are using a lot should have to be slowed down a little bit at some point. That's all the stuff where there's agreement. What there isn't agreement on at all yet, and I don't think we really have enough experience to know what's positive and what isn't, is the paid prioritization issue, okay? That is, I'm gonna give you the Netflix part for free. Is that good for consumers or is that bad for consumers? Okay, it's positive in the sense that, okay, you're getting something that is clearly wanted, but competitors to Netflix, will they still have sufficient access? Won't they have access? You know, does this give them, does this just entrench their position over somebody else's? That's where it's not clear, and that's where this bill just totally punts on right now. And I think we really need to have a discussion about that.
So is that not analogous to, okay, broadcasters have advertisement space and you pay to be in advertisement space, that's their network, and they're operating their network on those revenues. Like, how do you get around the fundamental, just, that's capitalism, baby, elements of, I can afford to pay, and I want my traffic prioritized, or strategic partnerships? I mean, it's, you know, I kind of go back to the AT&T deal with Apple on the iPhone when it came out, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, that was,
it was exclusive for a while.
Exclusive. That was a pay to play. I mean, at some level, that's just how the market economy works, right? And so I think there are analogous elements to that. Right. I mean, certainly unsettled debate, but do you see a court wading into that, which is a pretty fundamental element of how our market economy works? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, our antitrust laws have always recognized that there are limits to that type of thing, that there are situations where you could be favoring one provider because they're affiliated with you or because they have a relationship with you. That's the entire reason we broke up Ma Bell back in the 1980s, is that they were discriminating against long-distance providers, which was competitive or could have been competitive. The conditions were there for it in the early 80s, but the laws and the regulations were not. So that's the question is, how do you identify that, what could be competitive? Because when you have sufficient competition, okay, I can't go to broadcaster X, but I can go to broadcaster Y, and I can still get my message out, and that will limit the power that broadcaster X has over me. What Pi has argued here with net neutrality is that he doesn't need the rules because there is sufficient competition. There are 4 major wireless ISPs. They are competing vigorously for customers. They're not going to do really bad things to you, I guess. They might do moderately bad things, but it won't last for long. Okay, that's kind of the approach on that. And I I want to be clear, these are my opinions as to what's good and what's bad. They're not my clients and not my firm's opinions, but we need to come around with some kind of understanding of where that line is going to be. If somebody can come to say, okay, in my games platform, I've got room for one game, goes to the highest bidder, right? That's bad news for this industry here, right? It's really bad news for this industry. Question is, could that hold? And if that could hold, then I think the laws have to step in and have to say, no, that's not allowed. But right now, what the 2015 order said was no paid prioritization at all under any circumstance. And that was probably too far.
Can you share your opinion on what you think the sort of non-sticky points are, the non-pain points that will drive change through legislation on net neutrality, notwithstanding the discussion we've just had? What are the consensus pieces that everyone's comfortable with that are just standing by? What changes can we expect there?
Yeah, well, there's broad statements that they agree on neutrality, they agree on non-blocking. I think the question really is what's going to drive people to the table to say we have to have that legislative solution. And I think for the ISPs, it's the uncertainty. Okay? They have to make long-term investments based upon the regulations and what they foresee as the regulations. And if this can continue to flip-flop every 4 years as we change who's in the White House, then there is no certainty for them. And I think that's going to be, to me, that's the main driver to say, let's get something resolved through legislation. Because it's really, really hard to get major legislation through. The last major telecom regulations were 21 years ago now, the 1996 Act. So, that's held up. So if you get something through, it's going to stick for a while, and I think that will give the certainty. And everybody wants that because you can work your way around. You can modify business plans if you know what the rules are going to be. That's one of the things I tell my clients all the time is once you know the rules, you know how to change your business plan to make maximum use of those rules.
So I've been watching this the whole way from the beginning to the end, or from right now. And my question is, Ajit Pai said that he wants to bring internet to poor areas, but how he can do it when there are like monopolies on territories for the antenna. Like for example, from where I live, I can only get a Spectrum and Verizon. Mm-hmm. I can get AT&T, but AT&T tells me that if you get us, you will have bad experience. So it's better that you go with the ones that you can have. Verizon is kind of expensive, and Spectrum is just meh.
Right.
And there is like a whole territory or monopoly on where the antennas go for the internet in a way.
Yeah.
So how he can repeal that, because that's more just business, not so much internet.
Right. It's a very good point, and it's a very good thing to keep in mind here is a lot of times we're driven and thinking by our own personal experience, and where I live, there are several providers. There's 2 fiber-based providers that are available to me. So I have some choice. The stats suggest that most of the major populated areas have 2 or 3 providers. Plus I have the wireless providers, which with the next generation of wireless service is really supposed to be as comparable as your home internet service in terms of the speeds. 4G wireless right now is not that, but 5G is supposed to be. So will it catch up? I don't know. Fiber tends to expand pretty quickly. But your point was, that's not true everywhere. And when you get out, particularly in the more rural areas, it's so expensive to bring the service out there that we don't have that many competitors. In many places you have one, or you have a satellite-based offering, which is suitable for many things, but not for some types, because latency is more of an issue with a satellite-based internet service because of the distances that the signal has to travel. So your question was, how is the FCC going to address that type of thing? It's not through the net neutrality rules at all. There's a completely separate fund that exists that is trying to make money available for those to build competitive networks or to build networks to places where they don't have it already. And there's a fight there about how we prioritize between those two. Is it better to spend our billions of dollars to take it to a place where there isn't high-speed internet at all, or to bring it to the place where you're the second provider so that you can provide competition? And then why am I subsidizing one provider but not the other provider is the core question that goes on in there. So the short answer is there's another fund that is supposed to encourage the building of broadband to rural areas or areas that don't have enough competition. If that works, then Pi says the competition will work and take care of the net neutrality part of the problem. Well, let me just, I'm the lawyer, so I want to tell you about the appeal process. I want to start with that piece of it just to understand. I walked through 3 cases. They all went to the same court, the Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia. That's the most common court that hears appeals from the FCC, but it's not the only one that can. And one thing that's going to happen is that there is going to be, when this order hits the Federal Register, that's kind of the starting gun for filing appeals. And there's a lottery process for deciding which circuit will take that case. And I expect it to be filed in many, many different areas because the DC Circuit has heard this 3 times already. But a major communications one from the 1996 Act was heard out in Iowa in the 8th Circuit. We've had major cases heard out here in California in the 9th Circuit, in Chicago in the 7th Circuit, and down in Texas in the 5th Circuit. And I expect that people will be pushing to try to find what they think is a more favorable court, more willing to overturn what this FCC has done or give less deference to that. People think that the 9th Circuit is likely to give less deference than the DC Circuit would. The 1st Circuit up in New England people think is less likely to give deference to the FCC than the DC Circuit will. So you're going to see people trying to manipulate this so that you get a petitioner who appeals this in each of the other circuits to maximize the chances that it doesn't go to the DC Circuit. That happened the last time around, but the ping pong ball that got pulled out was DC Circuit anyway. So that will be an interesting thing to watch to see where this goes. We'll know that within about 2 weeks to 3 weeks after the order shows up in the Federal Register. I expect that to be 2 to 3 months, however, because they take their time in publishing that. The 2015 order didn't get published for over 6 months, and there's no deadline for the agency. So it could take a long time. We'll see how quickly they want to do it. But watch for which circuit we're in. That will have an impact on the likelihood that the court will defer and uphold this reversal of the 2015 order. And with that, I thank you. I'm happy to answer other questions. I will send you my presentation if you want to have more than 20 seconds per slide to go through it. Just come on up here and give me your card and I'll send it to you. All right? Thank you very much.